There was an interview to the Telegraph, popped up online in the last couple of hours, that the Chancellor gave, where when he was asked if there was going to be a U-turn on the budget, a further U-turn, we've already had one, he said, let's see. That is hardly a definitive denial, and there is a crackle around the city, around Parliament, that is the direction the government is going in. That is the work that's going on behind. At one point, it looked as though it might be rushed forward. There was gossip that the Prime Minister, number 10, had actually said maybe the Chancellor should come back early from Washington, help with all these plans, maybe get them out the door earlier. It doesn't look as though he's going to do that. He looks like he's in the air tomorrow, not on the ground here in a position to make any kind of announcement. What will the announcement look like if and when it comes? Well, the big ticket tax cut that was in the budget, the biggest one, is corporation tax. It could be that the government needs to phase that in or maybe do away with the cut altogether. In the city, and we got a flavour of this in Parliament at a select committee yesterday, they say they're looking for a down payment, as they put it, of 20 to 30 billion or so off that tax cut menu. So an awful lot of stuff might have to be added in there on top of the corporation tax. And the great question is, does this calm the mood in the city? And also, does it calm the political mood? You would have a Prime Minister and a Chancellor who had been utterly humiliated, having to turn round on their budget and in effect accept that it was the budget, something they haven't said openly, that caused the bulk of the turmoil, the turbulence that's been happening on the markets. Would that calm down MPs? There weren't so many of them around today, but yesterday in the House of Commons there was an awful lot of talk about plotting and fast-track plotting. Tory MPs talking about how their new leader, barely 1 month in the job, could be got rid of as soon as next month. And they were talking about trying to do it by finding a unity candidate so that MPs decide who the next Prime Minister is and it doesn't go to the party membership. The problem is, this isn't the most united of parties, and finding a unity candidate, well, that's a very tricky operation. And who knows, maybe in the end it could be the one that saves Liz Truss.
Gary, thanks very much. Well, our Washington correspondent Siobhan Kennedy spent the morning at the International Monetary Fund, attended by the Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng, and she joins me from Washington now. Siobhan, quite a day.
Well, it has been, Kathy. Typically, the UK Chancellor would be something of a guest of honour here at the IMF General Meeting, presiding as he does over one of the world's strongest, most stable economies. That clearly has not been the case for Kwasi Kwarteng today. I was at the IMF boss's briefing this morning, and while she did make clear that the global economy was suffering, there was only one economy she had in mind when she pointedly said this: when monetary policy puts a foot on the brake, fiscal policy, in other words, government actions, should not put a foot on the accelerator, which is what she clearly believes the UK government has done. And while she is encouraging the Chancellor to make further U-turns, the worry here is, so long as the Chancellor insists or semi-insists that he's not going to do that, that some of the market turmoil that we've seen in the UK will begin to spread here to the US and to the global economy. And that, of course, is before the Bank of England ends its support tomorrow. Here's how the day has panned out for the Chancellor so far in Washington. The Chancellor had been hoping to calm the markets and reassure financiers that he had things under control, despite the turmoil. But ahead of his arrival at the IMF this morning, speculation was already swirling that he was about to announce yet another U-turn, reversing more of the unfunded tax cuts in his mini-budget. If that was the plan, he wasn't letting on. Chancellor, are you reversing more of your tax cuts? Are you about to reverse more of your tax cuts, Chancellor? Should you resign if you do so? Should you resign if there's a second U-turn? Are you about to reverse more of your tax cuts?
I'll be coming up with a statement on 31st October and I'm not going to preempt that.
So no U-turn, he claims, but the markets, for one, appeared not to believe him. Take a look at this line showing interest rates on 10-year UK government bonds. As rumours began swirling of another U-turn this morning, the interest rates fell as markets embraced the news because the UK would have to borrow less money if it abandoned its plans. But as both Number 10 and the Chancellor denied any reversal was on the cards, the interest rates rose again. But over the course of the day, they've since come back down. In other words, the markets have become increasingly convinced that another U-turn is inevitable, despite the denials. As speculation mounted that Number 10 was busy deciding whether to ditch further parts of his mini-budget, the Chancellor found himself in the awkward position of having to deny there was any such plan afoot.
I speak to the Prime Minister all the time, and we are totally focused on delivering the growth plan.
The problem is, few here in Washington or the UK believes that plan is credible. Hence the run on sterling, the spike in UK government borrowing rates and the emergency intervention by the Bank of England. Facts even he couldn't deny.
Look, there was some turbulence. I'm frank enough to accept that after the minute. But where I'm sitting here talking about the global challenges, everybody is focused on inflation. Everybody's affected by potential interest rate rises. Everybody's affected by the energy price spikes. Just yesterday, Kristalina Georgieva said to me that growth is a central focus of the international community. You were quite right to focus on growth, and people are talking about some of the ideas that we've put forward.
He was speaking about the head of the International Monetary Fund.
Of course.
Though she had a very different take, telling reporters earlier that she'd privately urged the Chancellor for policy coherence and clearer communication. Given what you've said about policy missteps and poor communication, do you think the Prime Minister will have to reverse additional tax cuts to calm the markets down?
Don't prolong the pain. Make sure that actions are coherent and consistent. I do believe that it is correct to be led by evidence. So if the evidence is that there has to be a recalibration, it is right for governments to do so.
A public scolding from the boss of the world's overseer of financial stability is an embarrassment for Kwasi Kwarteng on his first visit to the annual IMF meetings, where traditionally the UK is seen as a paragon of economic strength. Not now. Perhaps that's why the Chancellor wasn't seen mingling with crowds as he might have been.
Absolutely 100%. I'm not going anywhere.
And why he's forced to deny that another U-turn, if it comes, won't just be the end of his mini-budget, but potentially the end of his short reign too.
Siobhan Kennedy there. Well, to discuss the reaction on the markets to another day of uncertainty and what possible tax U-turns might mean for us, our economics reporter Neil MacDonald joins me now. Tell us first, why are the markets so keen on this possible U-turn?
Well, in normal times, the sight of a government budget falling apart would send financial markets into panic, but not today. And that's because many city investors have not liked Trussonomics from day one, and they will celebrate its demise if that's what we're about to see. You saw in Siobhan's package just now what happened to the interest rate on government borrowing over the day. Let me show you the same story over the last month. And you can see that when the mini-budget happened and those tax cuts were announced, interest rates just soared up. And that's because financial markets said those tax cuts mean you're going to borrow loads of money from us. We don't think that's sustainable, and we don't think it's going to be covered by higher economic growth, as the Chancellor maintained. If the tax cuts are going, if the public finances are therefore more sustainable, then it's just possible that the interest rates will come down as they started to today.
And what does that mean for us?
Well, as government interest rates have gone up, that's spread across the whole economy. Mortgage rates have gone up a lot in the last couple of weeks. Someone with an average-sized mortgage was facing the prospect of paying hundreds of pounds a month more on their mortgage, and that prospect, of course, may be playing a role in the government's rethinking right now. If the borrowing's gone, if the tax cuts have gone, then possibly interest rates carry on falling, mortgage rates may go up by less. I don't think we should assume that the whole increase will be reversed because, of course, remember, at the same time, the Bank of England has been raising interest rates all year in their fight against inflation, and that's likely to carry on.
So what are the government's options effectively then?
Well, of the £43 billion of tax cuts, the two big measures were the decision to reverse the increase in national insurance, cost £15 billion, and the reversal of the increase in corporation tax, cost about £18 billion. Now, the change in national insurance is happening next month, so surely that's too late to effect. Corporation tax, well, that's something that was never really demanded by the business community, and it's the single biggest measure. So that's, I think, why a lot of speculation is focusing there.
But something could then be salvaged from the mini-budget.
Well, perhaps not, because we're talking about choices here. It's just worth putting that 43 billion figure against another figure from the Institute for Fiscal Studies of about 62 billion pounds, which is their estimate of the savings needed to bring government debt under control in the next 5 years. If that calculation is correct, then reversing all of the tax changes would still leave the government needing to make perhaps cuts to public spending, to benefits. So you could have a situation where even abandoning the whole of the mini-budget might not be enough to restore confidence in the financial markets.
That's rather bleak. Neil, thanks very much. Well, joining me now, Nari Woods, who's Professor of Global Economic Governance at Oxford University. Professor, the markets are clearly pricing in a U-turn. So how full, how complete a U-turn does that need to be?
I think it's not just another announcement that's going to calm the markets. I mean, what's happened is, there's a certain part of the markets that are mechanistic and you can set them on a wobble and the consequences will be unpredictable, and the wobble has definitely begun. What the government needs is not just an announcement, it's a clear plan with all the working behind it. It needs to make sure that it brings trusted people into the team so that everyone believes the plan and knows it will be implemented. And it needs to very clearly show that both the Bank of England and the OBR, all of Britain's institutions, are together behind it. The problem is by trying to come up with an announcement, no clear plan, none of the trusted people in place, none of the other institutions lined up, they lost so much credibility, they're going to have to row really hard to win back that ground.
So taking out the corporation tax, which was the political and economic centrepiece of the mini-budget, that wouldn't necessarily be enough to calm the markets.
Well, no, I don't think it is. And I think it's, what we're seeing at the moment is a Bank of England that's had to spend the last 10 years pumping money into the economy to save, to recover from the financial crisis. And that Bank of England needs to stop doing that and start controlling inflation. But what the government's done has forced the bank into buying yet more bonds, which is inflationary. So it's putting the punch bowl out there at exactly the moment when it's supposed to be bringing the punch bowl back in.
Well, and it's got to take back the punch bowl tomorrow, hasn't it? Because it's going to halt its rescue purchases of UK government bonds. How do you think that's going to go?
Well, look, I think the Bank of England's in an impossible corner. It's going to be damned if it does and damned if it doesn't. If it intervenes and it's effective, there are some members of Parliament that will say it didn't need to intervene. Look, there's no big crisis. We saw this over Brexit. And if it doesn't intervene and there is a crisis, it's going to be damned for not intervening. What's very clear is it's had to intervene to calm pension funds. It doesn't want to open up the checkbook and say there's an open check on this. It needs the government to make a clear, decisive move towards the clear plan, the trusted people, the institutions. And it can't afford to just be permissive. It's got to show some tough love towards the government, because otherwise it's British taxpayers that are paying every day for this loss of confidence.
Well, you're quite sympathetic towards the bank. A lot of Truss's supporters rather blame the bank for not being decisive enough. Do they have a point? Because there was a bit of confusion about their activity, their rescue purchase of government bonds for a start, wasn't there?
Well, as I said, central banks, not my favourites in the world, but the point is they've got an unenviable job. They don't jump up and make a mini-budget announcement without any clear plan or any clear workings or any sign-off from the other institutions, whilst changing all the personnel that are supposed to deliver it. They're simply expected to come in after this great party and clean up. And that's never a popular job.
Right.
So I think we do have to have some sympathy for what they're being asked to do.
Just very briefly, the fears of another interest rate hike in the US because of higher than expected inflation figures. What knock-on effect might that have for the UK?
So it's got a really severe knock-on effect for the whole global economy. The global economy is teetering, and Britain is a country that relies on, its markets all over the world. And it's teetering because countries are bankrupt after COVID. Many countries, they're absolutely being hit by the energy price increases, The dollar is strengthening, interest rates are rising. For most of the developing world, that means there's a financial crisis on their doorstep.
Okay.
And into that, we need Britain to be the stable anchor it's usually been. We need the G7 to be calmly firefighting from the centre. That's going to be a problem.
Professor Nari Woods, thank you very much.